All right, so?
Yeah.
All right. Welcome. My name is Christina Gunther, and I am the founder and co-chair of Chicago Cultural Accessibility Consortium, CCAC. And we are a volunteer-run nonprofit organization all about empowering Chicago's cultural spaces to become more accessible to visitors with disabilities. We really appreciate, since we are volunteer-run and now a nonprofit, very much appreciate your donations, which you can drop off in the back. The $5 suggested donation to help keep programs like this going. We're really fortunate that we can keep them free, but if you do have a couple bucks to spare, it would go a long way. How many of you have been to a CCAC program before? Raise your hands. And you can make some sounds too, some noise. Why not? That was good. All right, so that seemed like maybe 15 or 20 people raised their hands. How many of you, is this your first time coming to a CCAC program? You can make noise too, even though you're new. Welcome, welcome. So that was obviously a lot more people there, if we do some math. We want to welcome everyone to this program. We're really excited. I think there's a lot to talk about, and this is just going to be the tip of the iceberg today, but it's good to get the conversation going, and we're excited to continue it with you all. A few housekeeping reminders. First of all, we have assistive listening devices. If anyone has hearing loss and would like to use them, we have them in the back. You can check in at the registration desk to ask for more information. We ask that everybody uses a microphone. We will have a Q&A at the end. Please make sure to wait until a microphone comes to you before you start to speak. We want to try to be as accessible as possible. We also are really fortunate to have the great Kathy Raycan providing captioning for us, which appears on the top of the slides to my left. Woohoo! Go Kathy! So anyway, CCAC is all about having a safe space for us to talk about access and inclusion topics. So we want everyone to feel really safe and respected. If you're new to this access journey or you're returning, we want everyone to feel welcome, and we want you to feel really comfortable to ask questions as long as they come from a place of respect. There's no such thing as a wrong question. So please join me in thanking Lucas Livingston and the Art Institute for hosting us. Without further ado, I will turn it over to Lucas.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Christina. Thanks, everyone, for being here today. And, another housekeeping thing, we do have more cups on the way, so, critical things. And Kathy, now I have a new nickname for you, Kathy the Great. Well, anyway, yeah, my name is Lucas Livingston. I'm really pleased to have been asked to be the moderator of our discussion today. And let's meet our contestants. Just very, very brief introductions, and as you see on screen here, lists who our panelists are. So Dr. Louise Hockley is a senior research scientist at NORC, the National Opinion Research Center at the University of Chicago. Thanks for joining us. Karen Kolbflut is the founder and principal of Age with Ease, a professional gerontologist, which Karen will certainly be addressing the ins and outs of the gerontological profession. We're also joined by Deb Delsignor. Deb is a professional art therapist. She is the adjunct associate professor at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. And Deb and I work very closely together on the Art Institute's Art in the Moment program for people with dementia and their care partners, and we're going to share a lot more about that program with everyone. And then certainly, not least, but finally, we have Hillary Pearson. Hillary is the manager of operations at the Harris Theater for Music and Dance. And Hillary is also a steering committee member for the CCAC. I, at the Art Institute, am Assistant Director for Accessibility and Lifelong Learning in the Department of Learning and Public Engagement, and a former CCAC steering committee member. Yay! So for our topic today, we're addressing aging, so older adults, individuals, but what do we mean by that today, in this day So who are we? Who's the topic of the hour, or 2 hours we have, right? So we're going to be addressing the intersection of aging and disability, specifically wanting to highlight not only lifelong disability, but especially age-related disability, disability that is acquired later in life. And we will also be discussing, certainly heavily pointing to the power of arts and cultural engagement for all, but especially for older adults, what that means to individuals, how the arts, I like to say that the arts really should, and there's a growing international recognition that the arts should be part of our overall just wellness and health regime, right? We hear about in other countries of the world, doctors are actually prescribing museum and theater and cultural enrichment instead of medicine, right? Or maybe in addition to medicine. So, but it should definitely be part of our overall health and wellness for healthy living and healthy aging. So we're going to get in heavy and thick into that. But I want to right away go ahead and hand things over to Louise, who will be introducing us to the aging population, and so we can learn more about that. Thanks.
So I'll get right from the foundation here, talk about who is our audience that we're talking about, the older adults. I'm thinking here that we're going to be pretty uniformly talking about people who are 65 and older. You can define that differently, but the statistics I'll give you here have to do with that population. Figures from 2016, we had 51 million older adults, which was 16% of the total population. I'll just throw your mind forward to 2060, where that population will be a quarter of the total population of the country. We also know that there are 34 million silent generation older adults still with us, 17 million baby boomers already in that group, and that is about to grow. You will see that little figure on the right of, I sometimes think of it as a rat swallowing, a snake swallowing a rat, and the rat is the baby boomers as they're bulging their way up through the tract. And they're a big group, and you can see that as we go along in time, the left panel shows 1960, so you can see that there's a large population of younger kids, that's the baby boomers being born. And then as you look to 2060, they're all in the upper part of the graph being pushed out the other end. I want to draw your attention to generational changes because the older adults that you have been serving are gradually but surely shifting in their demographics. You're going to see baby boomers having a higher level of education on average. They're going to live longer, so you're going to have them in the system longer, you might say. They're more likely to be obese and have a disability. So this is going to be a very needy population. They're not necessarily unhealthier in the traditional sense, in that they are already benefiting from advances in the treatment of cardiovascular disease and diabetes and so on. But they're not going to be living high quality because of disabilities. They're less secure financially. So if you think you've already got a problem with addressing a population that can't afford the cultural amenities, that's not going to get better. And they're going to be more racially and ethnically diverse, for whatever that means to the kinds of programming you're considering. The figure here on the right is again showing just the baby boomers pushing their way up the highlighted strip, moving from can't see it, all the way through 2060. 1945, that's the first year, roughly, when the baby boom started. For the population 65 and older, I just wanted to give you an overview. This is a plot by county, where the light yellow has populations that are less than 15% that age. The light green are 15 to 22 or so, I can't read that either. And the blue is over 22%, 65 and older. So if you can zoom in there to Cook County and the city of Chicago, we're in one of the low-aged population. We're a relatively young county relative to some. When we talk about older adults, in my field, I look a lot at how social relationships affect health during aging. We often hear and we talk about social isolation and loneliness. I want to talk about that in a sense too, because cultural activities are used to manage feelings of loneliness. But I want to make the distinction: when you are seeing people and you think they are lonely, you have to be careful to not equate loneliness with social isolation. And that social isolation is just a feature of their circumstance. Are they relatively alone? It's not just are they living alone, but do they not have other people that they can interact with on some regular basis? Do they have a very small network? Do they not get the kinds of support they need when they want it because of not having those people around? Loneliness, on the other hand, is the feeling of isolation. And anybody who has felt lonely probably also knows that you can feel lonely even when you have a lot of other people around. It's very subjective, and what we really, one of the other key differences is what you really see in loneliness is this distress. It's unpleasant. People can be relatively alone by choice. It doesn't have to necessarily make them feel lonely. So you have to be able to distinguish what it is that you're interested in dealing with when you have an older adult population. Why should we care about those features anyway? So I have a figure here of a tombstone to illustrate the fact that there's a good-sized body of research now linking loneliness and social isolation with increased risk for premature mortality, for poor physical health, for poor mental health, for poor cognitive health, the increased incidence and earlier incidence of cognitive impairment and dementia, as well as other physical ailments, and disability is one of those, as well as other diseases. The other reason to care is that it's costly. You get a huge increase in healthcare costs. It's a fairly new study that used Medicare data and compared people, older adults who were socially isolated, meaning they had very few of those social connections I was talking about. They probably did not have a spouse. They didn't have many friends. They didn't belong to groups. They didn't attend church. Truly isolated. From those who were less isolated, the estimate there was that the healthcare system, the federal government, your taxes, were paying $1,600 extra for each isolated older adult, which amounts to this huge figure of $6.7 billion a year in funding for these people. So what has that got to do with arts and culture? Well, there are growing pieces of evidence that show that cultural engagement is very protective. People who engage in cultural activity, who either attend or participate in arts of some kind, show benefits in terms of how lonely they feel, quality of life more generally. The first one that I wanted to point to was a study that looked, this is in the UK. By the way, a lot of the research, at least recent research, has come out of the UK in this regard because they are ahead of us in the age bubble. Their older adults got older sooner and they've got a bigger bulge, and they've been dealing with this issue a little bit longer than we have. So receptive engagement, actually going to attend, listening rather than actually making anything, what people here might do if they're coming to the Art Institute. Receptive engagement, at least every few months, reduced the odds that older adults became lonely over a 10-year follow-up period. That's just receptive engagement. Theater and drama participation also has widespread health benefits, and this is a review of a number of these types of studies that have found that there's a benefit to participating in these types of cultural activities, arts activities. I've underlined that the aesthetic value and quality of the drama matter. That should be self-evident, but I think I'll come back to that later. If I don't, you can nudge me. Another a study that did a review, and this is by Noyce et al., and this is a fellow who's been in, his wife, I think, they've been in Elmhurst for some time. Very well known in the field. His review of research in this area also shows that participatory arts engagement, whether it's dance, theater, music, visual arts, has a range of benefits, not only for feelings of loneliness, and connectedness, and quality of life, but actual physical health outcomes, like how good, let's say you're doing dance, that actually can improve people's balance and their speed of walking. So one might ask, and you probably ask this of yourselves in your organizations, what is it that motivates people to participate? And there are research findings showing there's sort of this cluster of things that have been identified. It's intrinsically pleasurable to take part. People find they get social support in these group arts contexts. Some people they value the stimulation and the potential to be productive in those contexts. They may take great satisfaction with creating something, or a more generic, if you want to call it that, higher arching value, which they see as being more meaning in their life for having participated. Some of you might be familiar with the NEA having done a study it was published back in 2015. I'm showing you an image of the front page, or at least one of the early pages in this report, where they were looking at receptive engagement in the arts and what it is that motivates people here. And they found that the social aspect, socializing, was important, learning was important, especially important for the older adults that they polled. This was a nationally representative study. Was the older adults really valued the experience of high quality art. So that's another reappearance of this importance of the quality of it. And they also appreciated having the opportunity to support the community through their engagement. They also saw barriers, and these probably won't look unfamiliar to you. There is an issue of time. This is particularly relevant for younger adults, not so much for older adults. But cost is a big issue across the board, not less for older adults. Access, and by access, it's the kinds of things you're talking about here. They may be interested in going, but if they can't get over the door jam at the entrance, or can't navigate the stairs, or whatever it might be, that's going to be a barrier for them. And then the social aspect comes out in the reverse. People don't go if they don't have someone to go with. And those two asterisk ones are particularly pronounced among older adults. Other things that you have seen, disability, whether it's mobility, sensory impairment. It's amazing how much we overlook the value of something like smell. That even though it may not be part of a display or part of an activity, becomes a crucial part of one's total experience, and lacking that may impoverish it to some degree. Of course, cognitive disabilities play into this. I think we'll hear more about this from other speakers. Diseases, I've mentioned access, appeal. So is this an activity that people, older adults, will find acceptable or appropriate, engaging, worthwhile? And I mention this because, particularly in the case of people who are lonely, it's too easy to assume that anything we give them will be appreciated, that it's better than nothing. Big part of loneliness, a big part of being human, is having some sense of autonomy and control over what it is that you take part in and participate in. And you have to be able to give people choices. And they will choose what they find worthwhile, and you can learn from them what makes sense for the audience you're serving. And they will possibly also fear social rejection or exploitation. That's another barrier. And that's also particularly pronounced in people who are lonely and already feeling vulnerable and sensitive to social rejection. If they were to risk that further in an activity, that could be bad news. I want to quickly mention a study that was done in 2012. Again, a population-based study. This is a general social survey. And for one of the first times, they found something about the population who were interested but didn't attend. Who are those people? These are the people you're probably trying to reach. And so what they found, let me go back one. Access matters, whether it's someplace they can get to, not only versus, like if it's rural versus urban and how far away they are, but whether they can get in. That was a big concern for 47% of those who would have attended if only they could have had access. Lack of someone to go with, I mentioned this before. For older adults, that's a big one again, 36%. These bars represent different age groups. The last bar is the oldest age group. They're the ones who are most likely to identify that as an issue for being able to satisfy their interest in attending. And for a smaller proportion of older adults, more among younger adults, it's lack of time. I have put on the resources sheet a number of other, jumping the gun here, number of other resources, ways that have been published or unpublished, but are ways that groups that have experience in this domain have learned to address some of the barriers of attendance.
We're going to transition over to Karen, who's going to tell us a lot more. I don't know about you, but I'm loving all of these incredible references and all the articles we're referring to, and we're just getting started. But don't feel like you have to scramble and write everything down, because you can download this whole PowerPoint. You might have seen the URL at the beginning. We'll flash that up again. What was it? tinyurl.com/CCAC 2019 aging. All right, and we include all these resources and references in the PowerPoint, so you can just go to town. Sit back, relax, and enjoy and absorb. Thanks. So yeah, with that, Karen, thanks.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me in the back? You're okay in the front as well. Good. So I'm delighted to be here today. Thank you, Lucas. It's really a treat to be with such a diverse group of cultural institutions from across the city and beyond. Just before I get started, I had a couple quick questions. So when you think about your institution, who attends your events, who attends your plays or programming, how many would you say, show of hands, what percentage of that audience is over 50, is over age, let's say 60, by your estimate? So maybe 50% are over age 60? I see 1, 2, 3 people, 4 or 5, okay. How about 25%? Over age 60? Okay. What percentage of your volunteers are over age 60? 50%? 25%. Okay, so I'm seeing more hands at 50% than 25%. And how about your donors? Over 50% over age 60? Okay, I'm seeing a good quarter of the group here. And how about 25% over age 60 donors? Okay, a few more added on. So as you can see, while we may only have about 15% of people over age 60 in Cook County, but we see a greater emphasis of older adults, both as participants and users of the arts. We see a greater percentage in volunteers, certainly. Especially when you add in organizations like the Angels, who may be your docents, your ushers that you're using at performances, and certainly of donors. So really, at every age, art can provide a respite from our daily lives. It's a place to imagine new things, a place to contemplate both our lived life and maybe fantasies or the future. It can transport us back in history, or it can bring us forward into the future. In particular, for older adults who may be facing an increasingly circumscribed life, diminished resources, there may be family moving, people that have been important in their lives are no longer there. The arts can provide a vehicle to transport them into a respite from their day-to-day lives. And so as this quote shows, we know that older adults who attend cultural events, any type really, reported both better mental but also better physical health than those who did not. And again, these resources are at the end. You all play a critical role. You might not know it for people as they grow older, but I am here to tell you that you do. Now, as Lucas referenced, I'm a gerontologist. I'm a generalist in the field of aging. I study everything from financial and environmental considerations to what the community aspects of life are, health and wellness, lifelong learning, social connectedness, and beyond. As you see here, gerontology is the scientific study of old age, the process of aging, and the strengths and deficits of people as they age. It's important to note that this definition used to only say the deficits of people as they age. There are strengths. Louise talked a bit about what was happening nationally. I think it's important to also know what's happening in Chicago. This data is from the 2010 census. There are almost 400,000 individuals age 60 and better. I think the most recent number is around 450,000. Almost 120,000 people living alone. And this is common across the country, although there are increasing needs and numbers of people growing older. We have less resources and declining revenues across the board. And so that creates a real opportunity for consumer-driven and community-driven innovation. People want to stay at home. They want the supports and resources to help them to still live enriched lives as they grow older. And you see bolded here, there's a need for programs to decrease social isolation and loneliness, and certainly to increase quality of life. Another movement that is happening around the world, really, but also you'll see it more likely in the United States, is an emphasis on aging in community. Now, we used to see a strong emphasis on what's called aging in place, which is being able to maybe stay in your home. As we've expanded our thinking over the years, we want people to live fully enriched and engaged lives throughout the community as well. And so really there have been a variety of different initiatives. The World Health Organization, who knows? Chicago is an age-friendly community. Did you know that? Show of hands? Okay, like 2 of you. We don't actually see it, frankly, between you and I and the signpost. Oh, this is being filmed, isn't it? We don't always see it in instance. There are many cities across our nation that have really fully integrated about how to incorporate the aging experience across all of the different domains that you see here: housing, public spaces and parks, transportation, services, safety, emergency preparedness, health centers, both the physical and built environment, land use, both formal and informal spaces, the arts, accessibility, and commerce and business. We want aging to be infused throughout those areas to ensure that people throughout their lives have the opportunity for the best livability that they can. And you see here, there's a picture of a really cute little boy running around on some public seating areas in a downtown area in a small town in Wisconsin. Of note, that is accessible to everyone. You could pull up to that in a wheelchair, you could sit down in a walker, you could have a stroller right next to you. These are some of the things when we look at livability that are quite crucial. Another nationwide initiative that we see happening right now is this slide. It features the cover for the Reframing Aging Initiative, which is a social change endeavor that's designed to improve the public's understanding of aging. This is funded, it's funded by a variety of funders, and the idea is to reduce ageism and to guide our nation's approach to ensuring healthy and productive aging for all people across the lifespan. We'll be doing some trainings across the city in 2020 about this. It equates the aging experience in terms of one of justice, of equity, and inclusion across the board. What the Leaders of Aging organization, who are one of the people who spearheaded this, we in our field talk very much about ageism, yet the public does not identify it as a problem. There are assumptions about ageism that it's less serious than other forms of discrimination. It's not considered a policy issue, and that really ageism is impossible to address and is not as important as things like racism and discrimination against people with disabilities. And in order to reframe ageism, we want to talk again about the social injustice and unequal treatment of people, which can lead to exclusion, however unintentionally, because oftentimes it's rooted in biases that are implicit or unseen. So this is a very important initiative and one that you will see continuing. Now, why do you want to engage older adults? And you've talked about them as your customers, volunteers, and as donors, but certainly what we know is that learning is lifelong. And we want to combat social isolation and loneliness, and so the arts are a wonderful vehicle to do so. A shared experience can create a sense of belonging. It can give you something to talk about in a life that otherwise might not have a lot of brightness or opportunities to share your experiences. As organizations, it increases your impact across the community and deeply within certain pockets. You're reaching an underserved population. A lot of donors are older. Regular donors still make opportunities, still make funding the cultural institutions that they care about important. We also know that grandparents like to spend a lot of money on their grandchildren. And I did hear someone saying they're having a new program for intergenerational opportunities. Older people are also influencers, volunteers, they're often alumni, and as we discussed, donors. Now there's a lot of physical changes as we grow older. I have entire trainings about changes in working with older audiences. I've included a handout about doing presentations. But in particular for you all, the physical changes of hearing loss and vision loss will probably be the most salient. People sometimes need to get up frequently and have difficulty with ambulation. And so that's something you'll need to be thinking about. But also, the most important probably is hearing loss and vision loss. So as you think about someone on stage and how they are facing the audience, the tone of their voice, how quickly they're speaking, these are all very important things for your staff and your actors, your docents to be aware of. And certainly as you think about how things are hung next to a painting, is it in a lit area? Is it in a certain size font that's readable? Or are people not going to be able to see it? I've worked with certain cultural institutions that you can walk in, and if you think about the experience of aging, it can be a very different one. So really, you want to do an environmental scan. And as I think about you all, how you can get started, you may want to do a focus group of volunteers or regular patrons. Select some of the people that maybe you think can think about this broadly. Surveying your patrons. You know, I see surveys come in the mail sometimes, and man, I toss those aside. But gosh, older adults in particular are a group that oftentimes does not feel heard, and they like to fill out surveys. So I would encourage you to do a survey and ask them about their experience. Using that data to engage a work group of donors or an impact panel to make changes, just even having that opportunity written up in your playbill can provide people the knowledge that your institution is looking at these issues. We see increased emphasis, Louise talked about this a bit, groups of people coming together, affinity groups, people based on an interest. Bring them together to visit or to socialize after. Provide a forum for people to convene. And then again, somebody was talking about they were doing grandparents events for grandchildren. Special engagements for particular audiences can be very helpful. Oftentimes as you grow older, background noise can be really hard to hear. And so having smaller groups, quieter groups, really thinking through the impact of hearing loss is one I would strongly encourage. And then if you do some shifts in your marketing, either in the flyers that you have at the at events or when you do mailings and such, I'd really encourage you to also do some evaluation to look at how changes are made with attendees. We'll talk further in questions about other ways to involve older people. So I'll look forward to talking further.
All right. For the sake of time, this is my transition. Very smooth to Deb.
Hi everyone, I'm Deb. I have been working in the field of aging as an art therapist for over 20 years, and I've worked with older adults who are institutionalized, living in long-term care settings. And I've also been working with Lucas here for over 10 years, working within a museum setting too. So it's sort of interesting coming into cultural spaces as somebody who's coming from an elder care perspective, and also as an art therapist. A lot of my work is around how can we impact the stigmatization and the marginalization of older adults through the arts. And so that's the framework through which I bring into all the stuff that I do. So as we think about accessibility, I couldn't help but think about, like, how do we make these spaces socially accessible to older adults? Karen talked a little bit about ageism and the experience of an older adult. I think it's really important that we check our own ageist views. I think we make a lot of assumptions, and we also make a lot of generalizations. And I think it's really common to do that. Even there, here today, we've been talking a lot about older adults. There are so many intersections as individuals and as people, just as everybody else in this room. We all come from extremely diverse lived experiences, and so there is no older adult, obviously, but we need to really be thinking about our assumptions. Are we assuming that people have a disability? Are we thinking, I think a really key way to check how we view older adults is really to think about how we talk to and with them. I think a lot of times people's voices get really high and kind of sing-songy when we start talking to older adults. And why do we do that? And people pick up on that. I remember a woman that I worked with, she was in her early 70s, a colleague of mine, and she came into work one day and she said, it finally happened. And I said, what happened? She said, I got on the bus and someone said, hi, sweetie, you want my seat? And she's like, I'm fine, I crossed that line. I crossed that line, and now I'm older and people see me that way and they treat me differently. And so I think we really need to be mindful of that as we communicate. Also, how do we co-create spaces for older adults? Meaning, like, I think a lot of times we have discussions in groups, in rooms like this, we're like, well, we could do this and we could do that. But, like, where are the people that are going to be experiencing these experiences? And why not have this room be filled with people who are older and can share their own lived experiences with us and help us we can work with them about creating those spaces. Sort of this idea of shifting from doing for to doing with. We talk a lot about that in justice practices, when we think about power and think about who has power. People who, I think with also socially making things accessible and like just enjoyable for people, I think sort of considering where the power holds. Older adults were once not older adults and they held the power. And then we cross this line, and all of a sudden, because people aren't productive, they're not as valuable to our society, and I think we need to really keep that in mind as we create and design programs within our cultural institutions. Okay, that's my spiel on that. So now, why do we make art? Why do we make art? Why do we engage in creative practices? Why is that important? And I'm saying, with older adults and people living with dementia, but really this is for all of us, for all people, and we can all benefit from that engagement. Developmentally, though, as older adults, we become more and more primed to be creative and to engage in creative practices. We have more dendritic connections in our brains and in a healthy 75-year-old than in any time during our life. And in society, we think oh, they're 75, they no longer can't think anymore or something, But really, they have the strongest brains. And also, like, people cross lines, people realize, like, I don't care what people think of me anymore, which kind of opens us up to not being scared to create. Also, we go through this phase of summing up our lives. Like, all of a sudden, all our memories that have been stored up in our brains start coming down, and they come out of our mouths, and we tell stories, and there's opportunities to share that lived experience. Gene Cohen came up with these human potential stages. You might want to check that out. It's in other resources. Socially, I'm not going to go into this too much because it's already been spoken to, but socially, artists tend to experience less depression in general population than non-artists, and also people tend to be a little bit more engaged, and there's a lot of research out there now demonstrating that even 1 hour of a creative activity can have a really large impact. Obviously, when we make art, when we create art, when we move, our nervous system is engaged. Either our motor systems, our sensory systems, our visual pathways. We're strengthening ourselves as we engage in the arts. Mental health as well. When we make art, oxytocin gets released. A neurotransmitter gets released in our bodies. Serotonin gets released. These are things that impact feelings of relaxation and also less depression. So, how do we make the overall experience in these cultural spaces more accessible to as many people as possible? So that's always the question when we're thinking about how to open up these spaces. Consider multi-sensory strategies. Karen just talked a lot about how we all perceive the world differently, and maybe where one person might not be smelling as well as they used to, other people might have hyper smell. They really might receive and perceive the world really well through their nose, because maybe their eyes aren't working because they've been around for 95 years and they're just not working like they used to, right? So how do we create experiences where people are encouraged to use all of their senses? Also considering diverse learning styles. We all learn different ways. I'm resisting going into our Art in the Moment program, so I'm not going to give examples yet. And also think about ways that we might engage in art in different ways. A lot of times when sometimes when we look at art pieces in the museum, instead of just talking about it or making art about it, we write poetry in the moment, like about the piece that's right in front of us, because maybe people are more connected with their words than they are to the paintbrush. Okay, and these last two slides are kind of around memory loss, and I could stand up here and give you tons of tips about ways that you can be successful in engaging people, but I thought maybe I would give more of an umbrella look. So this is a flower that this man named Tom Kitwood wrote in 1996 in a book called Dementia Reconsidered. These are the psychological needs of a person living with dementia. These are the psychological needs of all of us, not just older adults. We need to feel a sense of love. And how do we feel a sense of love? We need to feel comfort in our lives. We need to have a good sense of our identity, occupation, what's our purpose, inclusion, and attachment. So I thought about this, like, how is this related to cultural spaces? I often use this flower when we're talking about care. But if we think about that, like, what is a person with memory loss? What's their identity? We can help people engage in looking at art pieces and have them reflect back at how this relates to their life story. If they no longer have access to their life story, as we've had in the past, like, their identity becomes how they're being interacted with in that moment. So if somebody's like, or like nervous around somebody who has dementia, people are going to be like, oh no, I'm somebody that people aren't comfortable around, and then that becomes their identity. Inclusion. How do we talk with people instead of about people in front of them? I think that that's a big thing that people with dementia talk about a lot. They're like, how come that person's talking about me? I'm right here. Hello. We have to be careful that we're not doing that in the spaces, in these cultural spaces. People need to feel comfortable. Occupation. I think a lot of times when we're engaging with people in the gallery, or even in the art space in these studios, sometimes people are like, what are we doing? Like, what's going on here? Like, why are we doing this? And sometimes, like, this idea of what's the purpose? What's the person's, like, in the moment occupation? What is that about? And so being able to create spaces or be able to be aware of when people aren't really understanding like why what's happening is happening, it's really important to help people just feel settled and comfortable. Attachment is key. Sometimes people want to talk about somebody from their past. Like sometimes a person with dementia might be talking about their mother or their grandmother as if that person is with them or alive, and clearly this person's 95 and their grandmother is probably not alive. But we might need to create opportunities. Tell me a little bit about your grandmother. Give people an opportunity to kind of go there in their creative minds or in their memories or in their felt sense. So I don't know, I share this with you. The last thing I want to share with you is sort of how can we be creative about engaging folks living with dementia? And there's I pulled this resource. This woman talks about interacting with people the way you might interact with arts. So we interact with the art making process with an open attitude. We see it with fresh eyes every time. So it might be the same person that's coming to your cultural space on a weekly basis, on a monthly basis, and you might think, oh, I know George. George is always this way. Always have fresh eyes because George is going to present in a different way every time. The quality of attention. Give your full attention to the moment. Because there's no judgment. You can't get let disabilities or anything kind of get in your way. You're going to sort of see that person and engage with them fully. If the quality of our attention is really key. Focus on the potential that's in front of us as opposed to considering, well, she can't do that, she's got dementia, so there's no way she could have a meaningful conversation in the moment. Trusting the process. I think a lot of times we have to be okay with not knowing where we're going. We don't know where the conversation's going to go, but we have to be cool with that, and wherever it goes, we have to be cool with it. Authenticity. People know when we're being authentic or not. We all know that. That does not get lost. Sometimes it's not really pretty, but if somebody looks at an art piece and they start crying, like how do we hold space and allow for that to happen as opposed to, come on, be happy, you came here to be happy. And then last, the tolerance for uncertainty. The goal is not to really accomplish anything. The goal is just to be in the moment and be with people. So I'm going to invite Lucas up here because he's going to talk a little bit about the Art in the Moment program that we've been working on.
Thanks, Deb. I love hearing the information about what's going on in our brain when we're engaging with arts and culture or creating, producing, and expressing ourselves. It reminds me, you said something to me once before about, you compared something about the same chemicals going on that when like a mother holds her child or something like that. It's the same chemical reaction in the brain. So that's really interesting. I'm going to share a little bit about. Now we're going to move into, I guess, the section where we're speaking from the museum's perspective and speaking from then with Hillary from the performing arts venue's perspective of how we try to actualize a lot of what we're discussing here, and then we'll have plenty of time for Q&A. After this. But to speak a bit about Art in the Moment, as Deb briefly addressed, and Art in the Moment is the Art Institute's program. It's 10 years old now, a little more than that. And, it's right on 10 years old. Wow, happy anniversary. Our program for individuals who are living with dementia and their care partners, and that's something we always like to emphasize, is that with the care partners as well, whether it is a family member or a paid caregiver, we feel just as critical to involve the care partner for the benefit of all, for the benefit of the care partner as well as for the benefit of the individual with the diagnosis, to create a atmosphere that breaks down the clinical hierarchies that they might experience day in, day out, to create an atmosphere where maybe the fact that there is the diagnosis of dementia, that might will create an environment where that might very well even be just forgotten about, and just to allow couples or parents and children to engage in an atmosphere that is akin to what they had experienced and do want to continue to experience. On screen we have a few photos from the Art in the Moment program, a couple details of the art making process, people gathered around in one of these studios here, creating and producing art, some of the finished products, some of the art supplies, and then a snapshot of us in the galleries of the Art Institute around works of art. The format for the Art in the Moment program, I probably don't have time to go in depth to all of this here. The anatomy of the gallery discussion. The program usually involves about a 1 hour conversation in front of typically no more than 4 works of art. And so we take it very slowly, spending about 10 to 15 minutes in front of each work of art. And then after that, we will return to one of these large studio spaces where we're in now for a hands-on art making activity. And this is all organized around a unifying theme, the works that we explore in the galleries as well as the art making activity. And Deb and I work very closely together to pick the works of art, to develop our conversational talking points, structuring the art making activity, to ensure that it does have a therapeutic value for all individuals involved. On screen we have a photo in front of an iconic image in the Art Institute, Sunday on La Grande Droite, and with the individuals gathered around gesturing at the image. And then the bullets here, this is actually profoundly influenced. I think these bullets are directly taken from, some of you might be familiar with the MoMA, the Museum of Modern Art in New York, their Alzheimer's project. And we do have that in the references at the end of the PowerPoint here. MoMA has put together basically an educator's handbook on how to conduct programming at your museum for individuals with dementia. Many museums around the country have implemented programming that's similar, but each time it's unique in its own special way. The Art Institute's program is very similar to, but certainly a little different from the MoMA program. At each work of art, we ensure that we do close looking, just silent observation, a careful description, a visual analysis of what we see, and then interpretation. The interpretation aspect is very significant because, moving on to the next slide, we don't delve deep into the art history of the work and such, but it's meant to be a very broad, open-ended conversation, never asking a direct question that could potentially set up someone for failure if they give the wrong answer, if they don't know the answer, but creating an atmosphere where we promote social interaction, social expression, and validation as well, that yes, what you have to say, your thoughts and feelings about this work of art very much do matter. Something I often like to reinforce is the idea that from the moment of the diagnosis of dementia, one is often stripped, that's a very harsh way to say, but often stripped of the rights and privileges that they have previously known. They often might not be allowed to drive a car. They don't get to say what they're eating or when they're eating, when they bathe themselves, what medicine they take. And so to create an atmosphere where they're granted that decision-making power by expressing what they say about the works of art and validating that is critical. I included the various slides here intending that everybody's going to download and carefully go back and look over these images, so knowing I don't have time to cover all the finer points here. but often trying to create a multi-sensory engagement through hands-on connections with the works of art. If we can't touch the objects themselves, then to create that hands-on physical connection through analogs, 3D prints on screen. We have a woman handling a 3D printed replica of an object in the Art Institute's collection. And so we are multimodal, multi-sensory beings. Throughout our whole lives, we learn through all of our senses, and so to enable those pathways for engagement is critical for learners of all ages, and certainly for older adults who might have hearing loss, vision loss, or with dementia. Having that concrete physical layer of engagement can often bridge a bit of a communication gap there. And I just very quickly wanted to point out, we were talking a lot about the barriers that older adults may face visiting a cultural institution, and so one tremendous strategy to overcome those barriers is to bring your arts and culture to them in place, to their community, to their neighborhood. The Art Institute's Art Insights program, 25 years old now, is a very robust program of about 35 trained volunteer educators with the museum, some of whom are in our audience today, visiting different retirement communities, all varieties of places where older adults will congregate, not only residential facilities, but also places of worship, park districts, libraries, the local senior center. So while it might be very prohibitive for someone to invest their whole day to come to the museum, they're accustomed to going to their local library or their a church or temple or to the senior center. So it's by bringing the Art Institute out to them is a great way to overcome a lot of those barriers. And I often love to just trumpet that the volunteerism at the Art Institute is as much a rewarding program and experience, and an audience. Volunteers, friends in the audience, I see a few, I sometimes consider you, this is getting meta, to be my audience in as much as you serve an audience too. And so through volunteerism is another tremendous aspect for the rewards of arts and cultural engagement that we've been discussing here today. So I think we might need to transition on then, but moving along to Hillary to round out our conversation and provide us with the perspective of the performing arts venues. All right, thanks, Hillary.
Hi everyone. I have no slides, so you're just going to have to listen to me talk for a little while. So I represent more of the music and dance side of the coin, the Harris Theater for Music and Dance, which is just a few blocks north of us right now. We work with a variety of different audiences because we're mostly a rental house. So every performance usually is in for a day and goes away, or maybe in for 2 days and goes away. So we're working with a lot of different types of audiences and kind of adapting depending on each group. So I think one of the biggest things that cultural institutions can do, and a good starting spot, whether you're thinking about aging audiences or just accessibility, is assessing your space. What are the barriers physically in your space? Walk through your space, knowing what those things are, the things that you can bring attention to, whether through your website, whether through, if you have a contact person who's your access contact person, that you're prepared for the barriers that are for someone coming into your space. If you're thinking about your website, what are those barriers? Are they accessible? How can someone navigate the pages on your website? And as I said, making sure that you do have that contact person that someone could reach out to if they have specific facility questions, whether it's about accessible services or just navigating your space or asking about drop-off points or parking or how close you're going to be to the front door. I think those are really good places to start. And then really, I think for us as cultural institutions, frontline staff training is key. So when you are doing your access and inclusion training or your diversity training, of thinking how you can also layer on the conversation about the aging population. What are the things that are, universal in that? Sorry, I keep hitting the keyboard. What are the things that are universal to folks who might be requiring accessible accommodations and for aging adults? And really having that built out for your staff so they know etiquette. They aren't doing some of the things that have been talked about, like talking, maybe baby talking or talking down to communities visiting your space, that they're prepared with all the options that you have in-house. As this was also mentioned earlier, options are key. So your frontline staff knowing all the options for seating, what are the things you have on site, assistive listening devices, performances that could be captioned, audio described performances. I think these are all things that frontline staff should be prepared with. I feel like, in my experience, a lot of the barriers when it comes to maybe aging adults who don't necessarily identify as having a disability is actually having the conversation about what someone might need or benefit from, and really being able to put that out there without making someone feel like they've been targeted as someone who might need a support service. So something that I went to a really cool session at LEAD, the Leadership Exchange in Arts and Disability Conference this summer, about person first service, service first training, and it was really centered around like your box office staff and thinking about how does your box office staff present information about access for your venue? How can we as institutions always be presenting the information about what we have to everyone whenever there's a transaction going on? Are we able to build out scripts that say, we see that you purchased these tickets, that's great, just so you know, we have assistive listening devices available on site, we have wheelchairs available, we have, there are open captioning performances coming up. Like, how do we build out those layers as frontline customer service staff so that it's not like a conversation where you have to think about, oh, this person specifically needs this. It's about everyone. It's the universality of offering that to everyone on the phone or online and making sure that that is something that your staff is becoming comfortable with that language and knows how to have that conversation for everyone as opposed to just specific folks. I will say too, something that we have been trying to sort of adapt in our space is, the conversation about how we talk to patrons about what they need, as opposed to kind of phrasing things as in how can I help you, for everyone that's coming in that you might identify as maybe needing help, of rephrasing it to be more of a I'm here to help you, and not maybe kind of putting someone in a position where they're really having to say what they need or feeling pressured to say that they need help. Framing it more of a way of I'm here to help if you need anything, and having those kind of rephrasing things like that. Something else that for box office and really customer service is thinking about how we consider the personal care assistant or someone who might be helping someone. How do we consider their experience with being in the space? Are they able to have a ticket or a complimentary ticket as well, along with who they're helping? How are we navigating those conversations and making sure that they feel included in the experience? And really thinking about how a lot of our programming that we do in different spaces really has a universality to it. If you're doing sensory-friendly programming, it's not necessarily only something that can be a benefit for folks with sensory processing disorders or on the spectrum. It could be something that would be of benefit for an aging population group who, having that relaxed environment, relaxed rules about theater experiences might make them feel less fearful about being in a space where they don't know what the perception is going to be of that performance and that engagement. making sure that you have resources in your space posted. We try to make sure that we have information about all the things that we have on site, because not everybody is obviously an online person who is going to necessarily look for things. But if you have things maybe in your box office about what you have for every engagement, like we have large print material, large print program books, or we have this today, or really making sure that that's visibly somewhere that someone can look at when they're in your space. And another thing that's been helpful for our staff too is creating some resources that could have universality for anyone coming, such as a social narrative or a know before you go video, if you're familiar with those, where it kind of outlines your space and shows you how you enter the space, what are you going to encounter, where are the box office, where are things located, and knowing that that could have a real larger appeal than just maybe for sensory-friendly performances or things of that nature. And we also have created like a step chart. So we have a downloadable step chart for our theater, so it tells you how many stair steps there are to each row in the theater. That's been a really helpful tool for our box office staff, and working with a lot of different organizations. That could be something that comes up a lot. It happens a lot in our box office. We get that conversation about how do we navigate to this space because we have so many different audiences coming through. And that's been a great tool to share with a lot of our other companies. Yeah, and just really, it all comes back to, for us, like training and just making sure people have a good sense of how to have the conversation, how to talk about options. And it's not just frontline staff. We're really thinking as well about our volunteers, making sure they have some of that language and etiquette, that we also are sharing with our development staff and marketing staff, because as we all know, we have a lot of us have very special engagements that are for a very specific group of high-level donor, trustee, folks who might fall into this category, who might not really know the resources are there. But they're not really talking to your box office staff. They're probably talking to your development staff and making sure that they know all the tools that are available and accessible to them, so that they just have a good sense of being welcome in your space. So those are just a few things, and I'm sure we can talk more.
Thanks, Hillary. So wonderful. Thank you. Thanks to the whole panel for this great conversation. And as Hillary has already kindly previewed for us, we do have some resources here where this is not the extent of it. Don't worry, this is another slide, and this is another slide, and this is another, and another. And I think this is the last one here. That's great. So, and we certainly want to thank you all. We have still plenty of time left to engage in the Q&A portion. We allotted lots of time for that. And we also received a good number of questions in advance that you all submitted through the registration page. A lot of the questions, some of the questions were similar, so we're kind of lumping a bit of that together. And maybe I might begin with one question here that somewhat a little bit maybe paraphrasing, but the idea is that so with older adults who visit your organization, what are some of the best ways to ensure that older adults can engage with whether it's through if they have a disability, if it's hearing loss, vision loss, limited mobility. How do you, make sure that they are aware of your resources and services if they do not necessarily identify with having a disability? I think once I might have heard that it's often the case that someone might have almost like a 30% hearing loss before they start thinking about visiting an audiologist, wondering maybe it's not just everybody's mumbling these days. So how to make these resources available. Hillary has certainly covered a good bit of that in terms of promoting it online and in print. And announcing at the onset of programs that these services and resources are available. But then also, how do you not make people who feel perhaps, I don't know, how do you normalize, I guess is a good phrase, to the access to these resources and services that you provide if people don't want to identify with having a disability. So I don't know, I mean, I have my own thoughts and comments about that. I think just in terms of normalization, one thing I like to do is, to normalize accessibility. That is, I know when I'm giving a tour in the museum, and when and what I try to encourage with other tour guides that I work with is that when transitioning from one floor to the next, for example, always take, if a ramp is available, by default go down the ramp or up the ramp instead of the stairs, but certainly point out the stairs that they're available. Or also, often we might take an elevator or go up and down a large flight of steps, and instead of saying, okay, who wants to take the elevator? Oh, okay, well, the elevator group, you go in there and we'll meet you on the second floor. You take the elevator, we'll see you up there. Instead, I'll say, if anybody wants to take the elevator, I'll go with you in the elevator. And so I accompany the elevator group, and then those who take the stairs, I'll say, okay, and for those of you who prefer to take the stairs, we'll meet you there at the top of the staircase there. So in that sense, it just turns it around, and therefore normalizing the condition that someone might not be able to take the stairs. But I don't know if anybody has any additional thoughts or comments about people who don't identify as having disabilities, how to make them aware, and then also how to, just normalize it. Yeah, please.
So, Luke is right. 30% of people age 60 and over have hearing loss. Half of people age 85 and better. Training, as Hillary brought up, is crucial. Your team should know to always look at people when they're talking to them, because what happens is people read your lips, and if I'm looking over here while I'm talking, oftentimes people won't hear you. So I think the training is really crucial. Deb alluded to the tone of voices. Higher voices, women's voices in general, are much harder to hear. And so encouraging people to speak slowly, speak in a louder tone if you need to, but yet don't start shouting when someone comes up, that looks older. I think also, I think Deb, you alluded to it, not talking to the person, talking to the caregiver or the attendant. When I'm with doctors are notorious for this. I'll go to a doctor's office with someone and they'll talk to me instead of a client. And I just turn and look at the person I'm with and pretend like I'm not being spoken to. So, really just the training is really crucial, and not just for your front-end staff. You want your development staff to know this for when they're working with donors, or your volunteer administrators to know these things as well. I think something else that I didn't really hear spoken about today is having adequate places to sit down and rest throughout the galleries. And if you're doing a gallery tour, maybe choosing a piece that is in an area that has some seating. And that's good for, the person with a bum knee. It's good for an older adult who may be arthritic. It's good for a mom with her kid. So I think continually trying to normalize the experiences, like I said, is something that is certainly crucial.
No, that's a great point. And often when Deb and I are putting a program together, we will consider ideas around, is there a bench there? Is the work large enough? Is it a space where we can sufficiently gather a group of people around? So a lot of those factors to try to just create that very universally or inclusively designed experience.
Lucas, if I can just add on, you alluded to this, people who need an attendant in the washroom with them. Sometimes at intermissions, it shows the women's line is really long, so that can be a challenge. Having seats in the bathroom, having a lot of seats in the lobby, even if it's just a chair like this that's sitting there, and you will be shocked at the amount of people that will sit down, and making sure that your team knows to have adequate signage places that say, here's a larger washroom that's accessible for multi-people, gender neutral washroom, whatever it may be. That's also something that is really quite crucial.
Yeah, and then also just about designing for accessibility, absolutely, and so should not the gallery, instead of creating large print brochures and large print labels, could be just increasingly lobbying for that being more the standard, right? And the great way to phrase it is to the curator and to the design department, like, well, don't you want your visitors to read the labels, right? So, no, but then I guess another question that came up is, well, in terms of technology, there was a couple of different questions that were inquiring about technological literacy among older adults, and so how can we assume, how much can we assume, and how can we incentivize older adults to access all of our touch screens in the galleries, smartphone apps, and how many accessibility features can we put in the smartphone app, assuming that the audience then would be able to access them. I don't know if we have any information about technological literacy among older adults.
Some. Yes, I'm working with a geriatrician actually using technology to help older adults maintain some kind of activity if they're, let's say, frail or fall and they need to undergo a continuous kind of physical therapy regime so that they can stay functional and not end up being institutionalized. And so the first question was, is this a non-starter? What older adult is going to be able to use the technology? We've recently branched out and are using voice-activated, Alexa, for lack of a better word, and eliminating a layer of interface that is often off-putting for older adults. Having said that, if you're talking about smartphones and other technology, smartphones themselves are not as popular among older adults as, let's say, iPads, and it's primarily size related. They can see it better. I can see it better. So that's an important part of this, and of course hearing it is also an issue. If you're going to have an app and you're wanting to listen to people do a little story about what they're seeing, it's going to be potentially challenging to rely on one sense. So if you have an iPad and you've got oral as well as visual, text display that's coinciding, you're going to improve your capacity to reach that kind of clientele.
Yeah, and I think when developing any technology product for your organization, if it's some sort of an app, whether it's a downloadable app or something in the galleries, I think it's important to ensure that it is adaptable. It's one size does not fit all, and so I know before I got my new bifocals prescription, I was often accessing the built-in features of my iPhone to increase font size, and then there are certain apps though that I use that don't respond to the iOS's built-in accessibility features. So ensuring that in your institution, whether it's a permanent installation like a touch screen or a app on a device, make sure that those are responsive to those features of font increasing and adjusting contrast and things of those sort.
I just wanted to reinforce that working with the older adult, and a number of us have said this, we learned a lot just by working with the older adults who were our potential clients to develop this app, because we could not assume to know what was going to work. And yes, you see a lot of diversity. but it's only by getting that input that you're going to be able to target the people you want to, address their needs.
I think also sending out advance notice. Hillary talked about a welcoming guide. If somebody's buying tickets online, if they're buying tickets to your theater and there's some background information or an app about the history of the institution, putting it in the email that goes out with it highlighted so that people have time to download it in advance, having a QR code there or something so that people don't actually have to go to the app store, look for it, download it. Kind of cutting out as many steps as you can is something that's important. And maybe having, of course, written instructions in addition to someone just saying, oh, just download the app. That would be something else I would think that would enrich people's, enhance the likelihood of them being able to use it at that moment.
Yeah, one quick question I also want to address, and then we maybe open it up to everyone here. But there was a question that I hummed and hawed, and I still don't have the perfect answer, but questions about supporting older volunteers, and especially those who might not have come to terms, I guess, with as one ages, one might age out of being able to support and fulfill the primary functions of what the role as a volunteer is. And so how to work with aging volunteers in that sense. Certainly, I think one very small solution, in a sense, that I like to offer is just, even if someone is not able to continue providing the service of their volunteerism, just creating a emeritus volunteer status that allows them to continue to remain engaged in and visit your venue, continue to remain with their volunteer status, to have free access to your venue, to continue to come to training sessions. So providing these avenues to remain culturally engaged and maintain the level of cultural engagement that they are accustomed to, though transitioning to a point that they don't necessarily are not required to, or maybe no longer permitted to offer the volunteer service that they had previously provided. But I think there are some other brilliant minds up here that would have something to weigh in on that.
I don't know if brilliant, but I like this idea, and what I think would also work would be to allow those people then to teach the next generation, share their wisdom.
Yeah. So,
with volunteers, so I spent many years working with older adults and volunteer engagement. So are you doing an annual review of the volunteer? That's something that should happen irrespective of age, so that you're able to kind of tap into those things. So your volunteer coordinator maybe should be doing that. Acting as a sharing your knowledge, becoming almost training the next generation, sometimes putting people together in teams. Doing, when you do your annual volunteer check-in, you can talk about, are there other opportunities that you might like to have? And you might do that every year. And so that you're able to, as someone continues to become involved, stays involved in your institution, you can find other paths. People have so many talents that are untapped. And so I think that it can be a real lifeblood to stay involved in an institution they care about. And so really continuing to find that path. And I love your idea, Lucas, of continuing a status of an emeritus or something as well. It's nice.
So shall we then open it up to Q&A, comments, thoughts, feelings? We do have a microphone here with Susan, so we definitely want you to speak into the microphone if you have a question. Don't be shy. Raise your hand, shout out, say, hey, I have a question. Stomp your feet, whatever you prefer. We do have one there.
Hello, I'm Nanette from the Art Institute. My question's for all of you, perhaps, maybe for Louise. What's kind of the next phase of research, do you think? What questions are people really interested in now that it seems to be pretty established that that arts engagement contributes to people's well-being. Are there specific questions within that umbrella that you think still need more attention?
Yeah, there's actually, of all the areas that I work in that are relevant to social isolation and loneliness, these arts and cultural engagement interventions are relatively under-researched or poorly researched. We're not collecting the kind of quality data in a lot of cases that really help make a case for its value. That is changing. I think one of the things that's coming on stream, and I think maybe several of us here have alluded to this, it's the idea of intergenerational arts creation. That's, I think, a hot issue right now because of just intergenerational concern more generally, that there's value to doing intergenerational work for purposes of reducing ageism, for economic reasons. You might have heard of programs where young adults who can't afford an apartment find a place to live in a senior assisted living facility, and they have a working arrangement of how that's going to benefit both sides. There are lots of ways that we could be looking at how intergenerational work could be a strength of cultural venues, how they offer their things, and that needs to have more research. And certainly a lot of research on what, I think for all of you, I think we need more research on the barriers that we can address for people who would be attending but aren't. So we know a lot about the people who come. We don't know anything much to speak of about the people who don't come, but might want to come. And how can we learn more about that and how we can help deal with that?
Hi, my name is Matt, and I caption theater and other live events, and I'm sitting next to a guy named Martin who this audio describes theater and other live events. My question is, I love the idea, Hillary, of like the concept of normalizing something like open captions, because I know that someone who might have low vision or loss of hearing would not identify as deaf, may not know what the two words open captioning even means. And yet, when I go to a lot of these theaters, there's an enormous amount of people that are enjoying the captions, but I know because they tell me afterwards. Is there, short of, depending on the theater or event, trying to normalize it on their side? If I don't have control over that, how could I help in the normalizing process? I can't change the name of it to subtitles, because it isn't actually subtitles, but do you guys have any idea of ways that maybe the normalizing could be on both sides?
I don't have an answer to this, but one of the things that I just keep hearing, and I really resonate with it because as I get older myself, I see the sense in it, and that is this notion of universal. It doesn't have to be for anybody, it's just there. And we tend to want to categorize, and we have this big chunk of normal adults, and then we have these special populations. Even within normal, there's a range and lots of variability, and we want to deal with all of it. So, universal.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I think that in my work at the Art Institute, where our departments in the school, I think too, but definitely our department, we're working on making syllabi that are just, they're for all. Instead of putting the onus on the person with the disability to ask for that disability and to have their experience be altered in some way, our syllabi are just inclusive. Like, we recognize that there are diverse learners here. We recognize that anyone can ask and be in conversation with their like professor around their access needs and all of that stuff, and like just sort of making it a part of everyday life. So maybe having open captioning at every event, no matter whether we know there are going to be people with disabilities in the room, there will be, but you know, like how do we, you know, maybe we talk about it at parties, I don't know, like when we're not even like in that realm, and just, yeah, like how do we make people aware of it? Yeah, I don't know. It's a great question.
I sing in a chorale, South Suburban, well actually it's the South Holland Master Chorale, but anyway, we at every concert have a woman signing. You can't sign musical pitch, obviously, but she's signing the words and she has dramatic gestures. I don't know that we've ever had a hearing impaired person in the audience, but everybody loves to have her present and giving another dimension to the music.
Yeah, I would just champion that in terms of if you are responsible for programming or if you have a relationship with the folks who are responsible for programming in your institution, it's having the conversation about programming with access in mind, not programming because you are being reactionary to a request. So really thinking about how you can build, how you can budget for those things and start to create these layers within your own institution where people are seeing it or they're hearing it and it's being demonstrated within your spaces, even though there might not be anybody in the audience who is identifying as as requiring that service. And I think that's something that cultural institutions have a lot of resources in this city to begin breaking down a lot of those barriers of just, it's here because it should be part of it and we plan with access in mind.
Something that we've started to do at our institution is, in our sort of slow push in this direction, is talking about these as program enhancements. So it's like, wouldn't you love to have that at your program? So kind of sell it on that way to our own staff, to our own programmers, to say, here's something else, another dimension you can add to your program. And we're starting to get people to budget for it initially, so it's not like, oh, now I have to like grab this budget. It's like, it's there. If you don't use it, it's just a gift to somebody else. Yeah.
It's a little bit apples to oranges, but not with captions, but with assisted listening devices, or the group tour system, the devices we are offering here at the back of the room. We sometimes make those available for the museum's public tours that we have here every day. And I really see that it's all about just how you pitch it as to whether or not the attendees will opt into using the device. And certainly if you phrase it as this is an assistive listening device for people who are hard of hearing, then very few people will identify themselves to the rest of the group and go up and help themselves. Yes, I would like one of those because I'm hard of hearing. And that's often not even the reason that people may sometimes borrow the device. They might prefer to linger at the back of the crowd and still be able to hear. They might like to wander a little bit from the tour group. And I phrase it, if anybody would enjoy having some audio amplification, then we do have these devices that will allow you to turn up the volume. Plus also, people who are non-native English speakers will enjoy turning it up louder. I know my native German mother, she loves to crank the volume up really loud and always has, even before, and she might have a little hearing loss now, but that's beside the point. But so it's about how you will phrase these. I don't know how, Matt, that's going to help with captions, but yeah.
I think sort of along those lines too, in the Art in the Moment program, whenever I'm not speaking in front of a piece, I always wear the assistant device as well. And I think that there are sometimes the volunteers from here, but like some of the people that come and help them, oh no, and like other people, like they're kind of adamant about not using it, and I can't help but wonder if that's because like we tend to other people, and so I think there's some power in joining, and so that's like sort of my small little thing that I do in that program, just I would.
Yeah, so like having staff opt in as well. So likewise, when we borrow stools or make stools available for a gallery program, then having the support personnel also use a stool, just so it's not that looking like only those who have limited mobility would be using the stools. Yeah. Questions more?
Yeah. First of all, thank you. My name is Atticus. I work here at the Art Institute as well as Annette and my colleagues here. my grandmother has dementia. She's nearing the end of her life, I think. But when I visit her, I would really like to engage in some of these artistic practices, but she was never really an artistic person in her life before she had dementia. So I'm wondering if you had suggestions on how to engage someone with dementia who never really participated in art before.
I think that's a really great question. I think one key thing is to consider how we define creativity and what art is and what creativity is. For someone with dementia, sort of figuring out a way to button your shirt in a different way is a very creative endeavor. And so sometimes it's about maybe reframing the way we're thinking about that type of engagement and how do we create problem-solving challenges with a creative element to it as maybe an entry point. Another thing that I would definitely recommend is we do it together. Bring in the materials and be like, hey, I just learned this thing. I'm going to try to do this. I brought some extra if you want to try too. And maybe she will just watch in the beginning. And, as dementia progresses too, people's understanding of the world outside of themselves oftentimes gets quite distorted. And so she might not know what a pencil is anymore. And so being able to see that that's what you're doing, a lot of modeling is really key. I think also showing really explaining why, maybe if there's a purpose behind the making, oh, I'm making this card for so-and-so, you want to help me with it, let's work on it together. And also exploring different avenues, maybe the art making might not be the entry point, maybe it's music, maybe it's movement, maybe it's another way of her to express herself in a different way, and you can make your way to the art.
Thank you.
Is that helpful?
Yeah, thank you.
Hi, my name's Carrie. Hi, my question also comes from a personal, my family, my uncle has dementia, but I think this has really been giving me a lot of ideas for my professional practice as well. And I'm wondering, I'm thinking about the frustration he experiences, especially re-engaging with things that he used to engage with more. But now he's having, he has some awareness that he's having to engage with them in a different way. And I think part of it might be that he's being approached differently. So I really appreciated your speaking about how people interact, education around people that interact with people with dementia who are experiencing the cultural spaces. But I think that, so I just was wondering about with programming, if there are strategies for dealing with the frustration that people might be experiencing when they are engaging in a different way or not able. Something you said about the art in the moment spoke to me as well, about not presenting questions that they may know that they should know the answer to or they used to know the answer to. I think that's really, that's important for a lot of audiences. But I was wondering about other strategies of that, because and it might just be my uncle himself and his personality, or the situation, his specific situation, but I do think that frustration might be more universal, and it could be a barrier as well to the engagement, or wanting to re-engage after an initial engagement if that frustration is experienced. So I was hoping you could speak to that, about how you approach the programming. Thank you.
Yeah, I think one key thing as far as programming is really reading the room and reading people's comfort level. I remember one time we were in front of a piece and somebody was talking about something. We had a new docent and somebody was talking about the piece, and they were saying something that wasn't true. And the person up in front of the piece was like, no, it's this. No, I'm sorry, no, really, it's this. And the woman got so agitated that she had to get up and leave. So I think not challenging is really key, and following the moment, following the journey, if somebody's frustrated, validating that frustration I think is really key too, so if someone's so that you know that they're frustrated, just be that looks so frustrating, name it, join them in that moment, so I think that as far as programmatically, we don't necessarily know the people that we're with, but we have ways of being in the world that is the same. And so reading that and joining, and then, because oftentimes when you join people through validation, you join them there, and then you literally walk out of that frustration with them. I have so many stories around that in particular. I think there's no right answer to, like, don't ask questions that are like, so, like, what color is this even? You know, if someone says blue, another person says brown, another person says purple, I just say, oh, this person over here sees brown. Oh, this person over here sees blue. Wow, this is incredible. Like, we all can be looking at the same thing, and we see different things. How wonderful is that? And, like, what a beautiful world we live in, that we can all be looking at the same thing and see different things. So it's like we're being creative in the moment. We're playing, reading the room, basically.
I'd say also I'm a quilter, and my mother-in-law is in her late 80s, just pretty severe cognitive impairment, and she taught me to quilt, and she was amazing. But she can't sew, pardon me, anymore. So I went to go see her in England over the summer, and I was assessing her capabilities. And I was looking through some sewing stuff with her. Just the act of looking through her fabrics, looking at the threads, looking at the things she had made, was part of the actual joy that she had that day. And then I noticed that she had some pieces of a quilt. Now, before she would have been focused on the sewing, but what we did is we laid it out, and there was a couple rows that were unfinished, so I said, oh, can we work together to figure out where the squares should go, and then actually, help me pin them together. So she was able to do a different type of experience that was a part of her passion. And I don't think it occurred to her, oh, but I'm not sewing. She still got so much enjoyment that day. And what I saw from when we started is she was so much calmer and more at ease throughout the rest of the day. And so I think you can reframe the artistic experience. It's setting up the paint, it's touching the brushes, it's not just the actual painting itself, it's the entire multi-sensorial experience.
Just to add on to that, I think in designing programs as well, like every art project that we do, I really think through like what are the different levels of engagement that are allowed in this process. So I would never choose a project that we would make that there's only one way to do it, or that it can be a project that can be extremely complex but also be completely simple. And so people can be successful across that line. And so I think really thinking ahead about people's abilities is important.
And just to kind of speak on the opposite side of the conversation, if someone's getting frustrated and you have your frontline staff, and thinking about in a performance setting, you're in the concert, and maybe someone is experiencing something in a way that is causing them to have a reaction, we as the cultural entity need to be prepared to empower our staff to have conversation with patrons who are around this situation, who could be like, what's going on? I'm watching, what this person's making a disturbance, I need to be moved. How are we, in addition to the accessible program that we have for all other types of disabilities, how are we thinking about what language our staff is empowered with to have that conversation, to vouch for the institution, for that patron who's experiencing something in a very specific way, but also be able to have a moment or a teaching opportunity with someone who might be just agitated that this is happening and they're having their performance experience disturbed in their minds, and how we are really setting up the tone for that and kind of helping to eliminate some of those barriers for people to feel okay to come.
Well, I think we are getting close to 5, and we love to leave a few minutes just for socialization and networking and informal conversations. But once again, I really want to thank our panelists here for bringing their expertise and all the CCAC steering committee. Thanks to you all for joining. Thanks to the Art Institute for hosting and allowing us to have the program here. Eat fruits, eat pastries, drink beverage, and enjoy. Thanks again.